Hey, welcome back to RamZland. Today I want to show you the single displacement redox reaction between a solution of copper 2 sulfate and an iron nail. Check this out. For this reaction, we're using 50 milliliters of distilled water, copper 2 sulfate, and a nail that's made completely out of iron. The first step is to measure out 8 grams of copper 2 sulfate. The next step is to add your 8 grams of copper 2 sulfate to your 50 milliliters of distilled water. Create an aqueous solution by stirring the copper 2 sulfate until it completely dissolves in the water. Once all the copper sulfate is dissolved in the water, you should have a nice blue aqueous solution. You shouldn't see any crystals of copper sulfate on the bottom. When we add our nail, I think we should also start a timer so we can keep track of the reaction as the nail changes. So I'm going to start my timer and add my nail. And we'll check back periodically to see it change. Here's the nail after 1 minute. Not a lot of change has happened yet. After 6 minutes, 40 seconds, you can start seeing something forming on the outside of the nail if you look closely. Okay, let's take another look. It's now 37 minutes and you can really see the color of the solution is changing, and you can start seeing something that's reddish brown forming on the nail. That isn't rust, that is copper precipitate that's deposited on the iron. So right now the copper sulfate is changing to iron sulfate, and the precipitate, that insoluble solid that's falling out of the solution, is the copper that you see that's forming on the nail. Okay, it's now been 43 minutes, and I think it's about time that we take this nail out and get a closer look at the copper precipitate that's been deposited on that nail. Just look at that. And at 46 minutes, here is our nail. And look at all of the copper that has been deposited on the nail. If you look carefully, you can still see copper precipitate falling out of the solution to the bottom of our container. And what was that bright blue copper sulfate solution is now turned to kind of a greenish yellow iron sulfate solution. And again, that's the insoluble solid precipitate of copper that you see at the bottom. Here's the balanced equation for this single displacement redox reaction. We start with the reactants of iron and an aqueous solution of copper 2 sulfate. We have 2 moles of iron, that's the 2Fe. We have 3 moles of copper 2 sulfate, that's the 3CuSO4. When those combine, the metals iron and copper trade places, and the copper sulfate turns into iron sulfate, that's the Fe2SO4 and you saw that blue solution turn to kind of a yellow greenish solution. And then we of course displace the copper from the copper 2 sulfate, as we have 3 moles of the insoluble precipitate of copper, that's the 3Cu that you saw deposited on the nail. Now this is also a reduction oxidation reaction. As iron is being oxidized, it's rapidly losing electrons as copper is being reduced as it gains electrons in this single displacement redox reaction. I hope you enjoyed today's edition of RamZland, and I'll see you next time. If you enjoyed this presentation, be sure to remember to like and subscribe.